Hi there. My name is Michael Smith, professor of political science at Emporia State University and a blogger for the MPSA. Today I'm trying something a little bit different, a video blog. I've been blogging with text for a number of years for the MPSA. It's very fulfilling, but I thought that just to mix things up a little after dozens of text blogs, I might try a video one. And feel free to let the organizers of the MPSA and this blog site know what you think. If you'd like to see more video blogs or if you'd like us to just stick with the text. But I thought we'd try something new. And my topic today is Professor as Cool Teacher. It's the thesis of this essay that increasingly at teaching-centered universities, the best way to look at the bulk of a professor's job is to be the cool teacher, a little bit like classic TV shows such as Welcome Back, Kotter, or more recently, Mr. Iglesias. Now, let me start with some good news. It turns out that graduates with PhDs in political science are getting jobs. Now, there's a very practical reason for that, and that reason is because graduate programs are aware that it's a tight job market, and they're reducing the number of students they are admitting into their PhD programs. Also, because of the enrollment cliff, they don't need as much help in the area of teaching assistants. So it's harder to get into a PhD program, but if you're already in a PhD program, your chances of getting a job in academia are pretty good. Recently, I was visiting with some of my old professors at the University of Missouri-Columbia, where I got my doctorate, and they told me that in their most recent graduating class, every single one of their graduates found a job. There was one that found a job outside of academia because they were unable to relocate. All of the others found jobs in academia, and I even met some of them, and they're doing remarkable things. So it's harder to get into a PhD program these days, but if you do get in and graduate, your chances of finding a job are pretty good. But there's another thing you'll find, which is that the job of a professor has changed. And in this essay, I'm going to address the responsibilities of a professor at a teaching-centered university, such as where I teach here at Emporia State, a university that used to be known as the Kansas State Teachers College. After all, this is where a lot of PhDs graduate. We can't all get jobs at R1 universities or prestigious liberal arts schools, and we may not even all want that kind of a job. They're highly competitive, for example, and involve relocation, maybe far away from family. Jobs at regional schools like Emporia State can actually be quite fulfilling. But to be successful at a job like this, or even at one of the new teaching professor jobs at research universities where they've created special tracks specifically for teaching professors, you're going to need to adapt to some new realities of teaching and higher education. And again, I think that the best models for this might be popular TV shows. I'm Generation X, and I grew up watching Welcome Back, Kotter. That one's a classic. And I don't mean to label myself as a cool teacher. That's a bit self-aggrandizing. Only my students can judge the quality of my work, and I don't know if I've ever been cool. But we know that the model of that, it's really a Hollywood trope. The highly relatable teacher that really listens to and connects with their students as people. And that's how I feel in the classroom some days. Number of things have changed about teaching since I first started teaching in the late 1990s. One thing, of course, that's changed was the fact that we went through the COVID pandemic in 2020 and 2021, and our traditional aged students today were generally in elementary or middle school during the heyday of that pandemic. And they experienced the shutting down of the classroom and the migration of teaching online. And we learned the hard way that K through 12 is not a good place for online teaching. Here in higher ed, if it's done well, there is a role, I think, for online teaching. But K through 12, it's not really the best way for younger kids to learn. And our students are really aware of that. I also do some recruiting, and I've had students and parents tell me straight up, We don't want to go to a university where the classes are online. We're looking for face-to-face teaching. Also looking for smaller class sizes, courses taught directly by professors, and professors that are really relatable. That's an expectation now. That's what I call the cool teacher. So there's a real craving for face-to-face teaching. Boy, the dark days of the early 2000s when trend spotters were saying all the universities were going to close because everybody would learn through massive online open courses, MOOCs. Boy, those days are gone. Today, a lot of the craving is for face-to-face teaching, especially for traditional aged students at the undergraduate level. At my university, we found that the best niche for online programs is actually graduate programs that professionally credentialed teachers and others, for example. But for the undergrads, many of them want that face-to-face. There's also been the downside, a loss of basic skills. COVID certainly deepened the appreciation for face-to-face teaching, but unfortunately, it also meant that our students lost some time in the classroom because online teaching K through 12 is not very effective. And so our students come to us without the writing and even some of the emotional maturity skills that we might assume that every college student would have. They expect us to teach it to them. They have very high expectations from their professors. They expect us to teach them those basic skills. They will call us out if they don't think they're learning. And they also expect us to know them as people. For example, we live in a time when so many people have various diagnoses, and often, although we can't ask because of privacy laws, do not ask, okay? But often you'll find that your students voluntarily share with you that they have OCD, ADHD, or on the autism spectrum, and so on and so forth. Again, we don't ask, but many will volunteer that. In fact, students today, many of them are very open about this and other things. They'll just blurt it right out. I had one student the other day tell me, I have the alphabet, referring to the different acronyms that are different diagnoses that students have. They expect us to know that. Again, don't ask, but if they share it with us by their own choice, and they expect us to respond to that. For example, if they can't learn in a class that's taught entirely via lecture, they want us to know that, and they want us to mix up our teaching methods so that they can learn effectively. They want us to have things that keep them engaged, and they'll call us out if we don't. But there's also a sincerity that I really, really appreciate. I highly recommend the book iGen by Jean Twenge of San Diego State. The full name of that book is really a summary of the book, iGen, Why Today's Super-Connected Kids Are Growing Up Less Rebellious, More Tolerant, Less Happy, and Completely Unprepared for Adulthood, and What That Means for the Rest of Us. Well, I would qualify that a little bit. I don't entirely disagree with Twenge and her extensive research that studies generational shifts going all the way back to the 1970s with the same battery of questions administered decade after decade. She's got good points, but on that completely unprepared for adulthood, I would argue that many of our students are wanting us to help them prepare for adulthood. They want us to know them as people, to connect with them, to think about how they learn, not just what we want to teach. And to help them prepare for adulthood, and they'll even call us out if we don't. That's a lot of expectation. But again, what I love about this generation is that sincerity. In Twenge's title, she notes that kids are less rebellious and more tolerant. That there's this sincerity that qualifies students. They're not looking for the gentleman's C. They're not just checking off boxes to graduate. They want an education, and it can actually be very rewarding to teach them, even if emotionally and in some ways cognitively they're younger than previous generations of students. They also have that additional sincerity, and it's a lot easier to teach students writing and other skills and even emotional maturity than it is to teach sincerity. So I'll take it. Of course, there is this cliff that I mentioned, the declining enrollments due to the fact that During the Great Recession, Americans had fewer children, which means fewer college-age adults today. And that's had all kinds of changes in higher ed. It may mean that you have fewer students in your class, which raises the expectation that you know their names and relate to each of them as people. It's also led to restructuring. Here at Emporia State in 2022, there was a major restructuring led by a president who was a former officer at Koch Industries. At Missouri Western in 2020, there was another restructuring done quite differently, though. That one was done in partnership with the AAUP, of which I happen to be a member, whereas the ESU one was done with an antagonistic relationship toward tenure and toward the AAUP. Personally, I prefer the Missouri Western model, but no matter how you do it, the bottom line is we're losing programs, and that can include the political science program. Missouri Western cut its political science major. Here at Emporia State, we combined it with history to create a history and government major. This also means fewer courses. It means a loss of jobs. At best, we may see retiring professors not being replaced. At worst, we've even seen professors being dismissed. But at any rate, you're going to probably be teaching more general education classes, even restructuring your curriculum to make classes that can also count toward general education part of major requirements, because a lot of those upper division courses for majors, you may not be teaching as many of those anymore. You're going to have more of these younger students, younger by age and emotion, that again have this expectation, not so much that you be an expert in political science, but that you get to know them as people and respond to them and adapt your teaching methods as necessary, both on campus and online, the cool teacher model. I'd also mention the bifurcation on research. It seems like there are two things happening at once here. At schools like here at Emporia State, there's more emphasis on teaching. It's been made very clear to us that while we're welcome to do research, it is not the focus of the university. And we're evaluated more than ever on teaching, and that includes post-tenure review, which is becoming more and more emphasized. So it's not just up through tenure. Now, on the other hand, we see borderline R1 universities pushing to become Carnegie R1 schools, in part so they can bring in that sweet grant money. Right up the road from here, we have the University of Missouri at Kansas City that went that route. So it's more of a bifurcation between teaching and research, and that means that many of us that do a lot of the teaching, again, are expected to really put teaching first and to be responsive to students, not simply to be knowledgeable about political science, but to reflect on how well we're really connecting with our students and meeting their needs. I might also mention the possible end of online essays. We went through a period there when having students post essays online, and then we grade them, possibly even using anti-plagiarism apps like Turnitin to screen for plagiarism. Was a very popular way to teach not only online but even face-to-face courses. Many face-to-face courses no longer have any paper components, but the paper components are coming back. I recently brought back hand-drawn graphic organizers, and I continue to give paper exams in class with electronic devices turned off, in part, you know why, because of the advent of AI. Exam prompts can now be cut and pasted into ChatGPT and other AI apps. The resulting essays are not very good. Some even contain citations to sources that do not exist. And we're even pushing it, for example, by challenging students with AI. I recently tried for the first time an assignment inspired by a colleague of mine. I had my students take a prompt and cut and paste it into ChatGPT and then critique ChatGPT's output. And I'm very pleased to say that the students found ChatGPT to be not much too vague and not very accurate. And they reported that they could clearly see how human written essays are far superior. Now, were they just doing that to please me? Hopefully not. But they certainly seemed sincere. And in general, today's students, most of them to me, come across as very, very genuine and sincere, and I sure appreciate that. Well, when I was in grad school at Ohio State and Missouri, I was not trained to try to be the cool teacher. I was trained to be the political science expert. This new cool teacher model is just that, new. It's especially new in the 2020s. It's the emerging student and increasingly administrative expectation, this responsiveness to students as people. As my wife, who taught K-12 for many years, might put it, teach students, don't teach curriculum. It's a new thing. It's a big change from how I was trained in graduate school, but I've got to tell you, it's actually pretty satisfying. A lot of our students are terrific people with fascinating life stories that, even if you don't ask, they want to share with you. And it can be very, very rewarding to get to know these students as people. And once you've adapted and built your new classes for the new realities of teaching, my experience anyway is that you will still find time for research and service. Teaching is emphasized more, but there is a space for it. So it's a lot of change. It's not what I was taught in graduate school, but it's this adaptation that turns out to make for a pretty satisfying career. And since there are still jobs in academia, you might think yourself about how you are going to learn about the latest teaching techniques, keep your learning methods fresh and responsive to students, and get to know your students as people so you can strive to be the cool teacher.